Howdy, howdy, everyone. Hope everybody's having a good night. Thank you for joining us. Arvin, thank you for being here. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, thank you. Well, welcome everybody to our seventh edition of our impromptu coronavirus lockdown Be Free TV, where we'll be talking about, you guessed it, freedom and freedom-based solutions to government-manufactured issues, and how our libertarian solutions can make the lives of everyday people better. So I'm excited to be joining you guys in this format. We've been having some awesome conversations the last couple of weeks. Really focusing on healthcare, insurance, government overregulation on these areas, and diving into some basic government reforms as well that we as libertarians would like to see really fixed and attacked in so many different ways. So in today's episode, I'm grateful to have Arvin Vohra, Libertarian nominee for president of the United States of America, which is just funny even to say as a libertarian sometimes. But Arvin, thank you for being here. Why don't you tell everybody where you're from? What part of the state are you calling in from today?
Sure. I'm from Bethesda, Maryland. That's inside the Beltway. I'm here in the belly of the beast. And this is actually where I grew up. I grew up inside the Beltway. And since from a very early age, I've seen the kind of abuses you have in government, right? When people talk about all these evil crony capitalists, those are like people in my family. Those are my friends' parents. Those are my friends currently who've grown up and become that. So it's not this shadowy world to me. It's a world that I understand well. It's also a world that I understand well how to dismantle. And that's what I'm working to do. I want to dismantle not just the state, but the powers behind the state. It's often called the deep state, corporate capitalists, crony capitalists, all that kind of stuff.
Well, I appreciate having you on and to kind of dive into these things because, the radical libertarian message of consent-driven human relationship and really, exposing, the underbelly of this system so people can see what the root cause is the control that they have over our lives. I know you'll be able to address that in ways that others maybe just haven't even been exposed to and hear. So, you're running for the Libertarian nomination for POTUS for president, and I'd love to really start the conversation here. Right off the bat, what do you think the role of president is from a libertarian perspective when it comes to regulating the health insurance industry?
So here's the way I look at this. Right, imagine that you're a country that's at war with another country. Cool. And you don't have any morals. You don't care how you hurt the other side. You just want to hurt the other side. You don't care how you do it, right? Here's what you would do, and this would be in violation of all basic human morality, international law, Geneva Conventions. Here's what you would do if you just didn't care about any of that. You would try to restrict their access to medicine. You'd restrict their access to doctors. You'd block shipments of medication to their country. That's not something that's really done by even the most barbaric states. But what we wouldn't do to another country in time of war is what the US government does to the American people in a time of peace. Right now, the US government is blocking our access to healthcare. It is preventing foreign doctors. The best doctors in Europe and Asia are not allowed to practice medicine in America. The Americans are not allowed to buy medicines from overseas. And this obviously directly impacts insurance prices because the prices are now artificially inflated because they're forced to pay for prices that are not the natural world market price, but rather a heavily inflated price. And then they make things even worse. I don't know about what the laws are in Washington State, but in many states, for a new hospital to open, it needs to get essentially a recommendation from an existing hospital. So in other words, from a competitor. Yeah. The result being that if you think about like the longest you've ever waited for a restaurant ever in your life, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, maybe it's like Valentine's Day, maybe 3 hours.
Better be a fancy dinner.
Yeah, like the fanciest of the fancy, the most busy day of the year, maybe 3 hours. That's a short wait at a hospital. And it's not because of something inherent in medicine versus food. It's because the supply has been intentionally and artificially restricted. And what a president can do about that is to get rid of all those barricades, to get rid of the laws that say foreign doctors can't practice in America, to get rid of the laws that say you can't import medicine from other countries, to get rid of the laws that say you can't buy things that the FDA hasn't approved of. And one of the things that I do want to do is get rid of the FDA. So there's a lot of things that can really make healthcare affordable instead of what it's become.
It is unattainable and, able to bankrupt people so easily nowadays for many reasons. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Is the chokehold that government has completely stifled what could be a huge and healthy industry.
Yes.
Pun intended there, right?
Right.
We have some of the smartest people in the world, the most creative thinkers in the world, and yet somehow this system of all systems is the one that's failing. We have better choice and flexibility with our cereal than we do our healthcare.
Yeah, and there's something deeply, deeply wrong with that. And this, I think, is to talk about growing up inside the Beltway, you get a sense of why things are that way, right? So you can say, okay, fine, at the literal level, the government is preventing foreign doctors from practicing medicine. The government is preventing medicines from being imported. But the question is, at whose behest are they doing this? And one of the big groups behind there is the AMA, the American Medical Association. They have pushed to, one, reduce the number of residencies in America, right? So that you reduce the number of doctors being produced in America, and then reducing the number of foreign competitors, again, creating a shortage and then driving up the cost. One of the icing on the cake of stupidity that we're seeing here is because of those laws. Today, it's even hurting doctors. Doctors can't do elective surgeries right now in many states. And that's a direct result of the AMA's short-sighted idiocy. I've been speaking to a lot of doctors in both in this area and across the country on these issues and saying, listen, the people who are supposed to, protect you by giving you a higher salary are screwing you over. And maybe it's time to actually go with something that is a long-term, sustainable, and beneficial for all parties solution.
And I think we need to move to that healthier, more sustainable system as quickly as possible. And I think you would agree in any particular order that we can possibly achieve it, because
however we do it is good for me.
Right.
Start by getting rid of the efficacy requirement. Great. If we get rid of the FDA entirely, great. If we let foreign doctors practice medicine, whatever we do first, get rid of the residency limits. Do something so that we can have a thriving, free, and convenient marketplace in healthcare. Listen, in the 1950s, normal people could afford to have a doctor come to their house. Now, unless you're like Bill Gates, you don't have a doctor come to your house. You have a doctor spend like 5.5 seconds with you if you're lucky. So that's a result of government. That's not a result of any science or anything like that that's making that happen. Government is doing that to us.
Yeah, and one of the most damaging industries possible, because it is our health, it's our life, it's the things that we need to survive on this planet at the really the core of our physical being. So it's flat, disgusting in so many ways. And I know we talk about a lot of this stuff on my campaign trail.
Of course.
It's been a lot of fun to really expose some of these things in a very narrow focus of, okay, this is all we're focused on here is insurance and healthcare and specifics here. So you brought up hospitals opening and would certificate of need laws, and that's absolutely something that is harmful. Right now, even in New York and Washington with the coronavirus, right, where they had to call in the National Guard, quote unquote, because a shortage of bed space, and had the certificate need laws been out of the way, the cronies that sit on those boards that control when and where hospitals open up, that issue would have been probably completely negated. And
exactly.
And we saw that even those facilities from the National Guard that came in, didn't service very many people. So you think if we just get a couple more hospitals open, we probably would have been okay in a lot of these areas. And
that's where I think and I think that's where we need to go. Here's the way I look at it. If you want to open a hospital, go ahead, open a hospital. And if your hospital goes out of business because you put it in an area with 37 other hospitals, too bad. But the way that the market actually works is having a lot of competing things in a given area doesn't usually put any one of them out of business. Psychologically, people end up starting to think of that location as like the place to go if you need a hospital. Just as if, when you have drugstores next to each other, they don't actually put each other out of business. They psychologically change where you would go. So it's a manufactured fear that hospitals are going to start going out of business. But honestly, if they do go out of business, fine. So they go out of business. That's part of the free market. And that's why we have more of them. We could have used 20 times as many hospitals as we have right now. We wouldn't have to be doing this, flatten the curve by shutting down the economy business if we had the level of the number of hospitals that we would have had in the natural free market.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. And, it's definitely one of these things where libertarians can now point out some things that in a tangible way that people can actually see happening in front of their face right now. So as much as, we can't be out shaking hands on the campaign trail, as I'm sure you wish you could be. And, I know I could.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
We do have an opportunity here as libertarians to really expose what's right in front of our faces as harmful. And, any regulations that have been, maybe reduced here in the meantime, we should immediately keep those regulations gone after the coronavirus is gone. And then, work to remove even more so that people can get access to the medicine they need and the doctors they need.
And see, what we're dealing with right now is this idea of a national emergency, right? And I do believe this is a national emergency, but here's the fact. When you yourself are sick, that's now an emergency for you. It's a personal emergency. It's a private emergency. And the fact that for so long, people who are sick have been essentially denied healthcare, right? If the person who could help you, if you're sick and the person who can help you happens to be Swiss, German, French, British, Japanese, and that's where they live, they can't help you. Now, maybe if you're not that sick and you can easily, and you have the money to afford an international flight or whatever, you can go. But for a lot of people, the person who can help them isn't allowed to practice here. And so the rules that we're using, the lighter rules that we're using for this emergency, you're right, should be made permanent. Saying that if you are from another country, practice medicine here. And if people don't like your service, you're going to go out of business. But that's the key of it. It's people should be given the option to make their own adult decisions.
Absolutely. God, I'm so appreciative of your message behind that, because, free people should have the choice in what doctor they use. Government should never restrict who you go to for your medicine. And, even just at the state level, reciprocal licensing laws would seem common sense reform, right? That catchphrase, that buzz phrase that goes around, and here in Washington, if you live 5 minutes from the border of Idaho or Oregon and your doctor can't, can't have an office, where he doesn't live type thing, or you have to get your, 2 different licenses instead of just one that works across both states. And truly those licenses shouldn't exist in the first place, because, doctors that are trained to heal should be able to do that. And it should really be more simple in that respect. But, so tell the folks, we see right now in DC specifically, at the presidential level, by the time a bill gets to the president, it's pretty much always going to pass, right? The power of the veto is something that doesn't come out a lot often.
Very rarely, yeah.
And knowing what libertarians believe on things, as far as regulations and such, what are your thoughts on a libertarian and that veto power, that stamp that says veto?
So I think there's a lot of concentrated power in the president to do good or to do evil, for better or worse. I mean, I would prefer that the president has basically no power, but the president has a decent amount of power right now. And there are things that I specifically have pledged to do immediately. Some of those are ending the war on drugs through pardoning. I'll sign a bill into law, but I'm also going to pardon everybody on my very first day. If you are in prison for a victimless crime, drugs, sex work, whatever, I'm going to pardon you. And I'm going to stay there as partner in chief to just get rid of that drug war. One thing I do want to bring out to your supporters is the fact that we already all have that power. We have the power right now amongst ourselves to halt the war on drugs through jury nullification. Jury nullification brought freedom of the press to America through the Zenger trial. That's why today we have freedom of the press, is jury nullification. And we can use jury nullification again to halt the war on drugs, to halt the war on sex work. If it's a nonsense crime, just say not guilty. And those are some of the things that I want to do, both as an activist to encourage that, and if I'm elected, to use the power of the president to do that. Here are other things the president can do. To simply command the border patrol that's trying to check medicines and whatnot to stand down, tell them to stop doing it, to shut down foreign military bases and bring the troops home, to do all these things that will allow better medical care in the United States. And some of that can be done by repealing existing executive orders. It can be done by using the power of the pardon. It can be done by using the power of commander-in-chief. There are a lot of things that can be done. And of course, you can use the power of the veto. So if a bill comes that's some total nonsense, yeah, veto it.
I love it. And it's interesting because, there are other presidents that have had the ability to repeal those laws. And instead of repealing those laws, they double down and they write more and more.
Right.
And everybody in the entire country knows how broken our system is. And yet none of the existing laws have been repealed. None of them,
exactly.
in that reset.
It's like the power behind it. And it's, you can't just look at the political parties as they're these standalone things, right? Because that's just nonsense. The political parties are puppets. You have a right hand puppet and you have a left hand puppet. And the thing that I think a lot of people in our party, a lot of libertarians haven't understood is that the thing behind the Democrats and Republicans, it's not a two-handed thing. That thing's an octopus. If we make ourselves able to be controlled in that way, then we will be controlled in that way. So a lot of the things that I specifically talk about, I try to make my language so specific that it cannot be co-opted or misinterpreted in any kind of way. So when I say on my first day, I'm going to shut down foreign military bases, bring the troops home, leave NATO, that's not like open to interpretation, right? I make it intentionally clear. It's not that I don't know how to do political language. It's not that I can't figure out how to phrase things in a way where I can't be held to it. I know how to do it. I grew up with that. I'm choosing actively not to do it. And I encourage all libertarian candidates to do that. Bind yourself with unbreakable pledges. Say something specific that I'm going to do this. And so that it kind of puts you in this knot. To use an activist analogy, it's sort of like, chaining yourself to the tree with it and then throwing away the key. Make it so you have no choice, but if you're elected, to make some major and significant cuts to government.
I love it. So what would be some areas then that specifically affect the cost of healthcare? Like, what one or two things specifically do you think are increasing the cost of healthcare, and what would you cut? What would you get out of the way?
Yeah, and the first thing you want to get rid of is the FDA. I mean, the FDA has driven up the cost of healthcare so high that, look at some of the obvious consequences, right? If you have a rare disease, all right, if you have a rare disease, you're never going to see a cure, because even if that cure exists, it's not worth it to the drug company to go through that final approval process. It's just too expensive, and it's unnecessarily expensive. Medicine is one of the few things in America that you buy after consulting with an expert, right? You don't just like go up and just buy medicine and be like, maybe it's this thing. No, you have a consultation with a pro, and that pro can read the journals, look at the scientific data for you, talk to his friends, draw on his own experience. And that's what actually happens now. Many doctors prescribe things off-label. What that means is the FDA has approved it for one thing, and they prescribe it for something totally different. That's the proof of the uselessness of the FDA. People aren't even prescribing things for what they were approved for. That's common practice in medicine. So one of the big things I would get rid of right away is the FDA. That's just driving up the cost. It's killing people. If you have a rare disease, you'll never see a cure. If you have a common disease, let's say you have something that needs antibiotics, guess what? The rate of new antibiotic production has been artificially slowed. As over time, antibiotics become less effective as bacteria develop resistance. That rate has been slowed. So if you use antibiotics, your antibiotics are going to be less effective than they would be without the FDA. So it's really hurting everybody. So I'd get rid of it. I would just get rid of it one way or the other. I would get rid of it with a clean bill of abolishing it. I would just hamstring it. I would just have an executive order that if you work at the FDA, you need to report for duty in the middle of I don't know where, in some place with no phones, no internet, no nothing. Whatever I needed to do to make it stop killing people in America, I would do that, because I view the FDA as a clear and present threat to the United States of America.
So you're saying you could move departments that you think need to go away to like Death Valley and just be like, hey, this is your new desk.
Yeah,
I mean, come to work if you want.
Find some way to get rid of them. I would just either get everybody to quit, or fire everybody, or just use whatever power I could. A lot of these departments are executive level departments, so and including the FDA. So there's actually quite a bit that the president can do to either get rid of entirely or hamstring it to the point of total ineffectiveness. And that way it would be completely out of the way of people. So that's one big thing. The other big thing is letting foreign doctors practice medicine. If you are a German doctor, a British doctor, a Japanese doctor, whatever it is you are, and you want to practice medicine in the United States, go ahead. If you're not very good and people stop coming to you, well, that's too bad. That's bad for you. And it's also on the job of people to decide what they're looking for in a doctor. If you want an American trained doctor, get an American trained doctor. One of the things that I do want to draw people's attention to is people say, well, this is about protecting the health of Americans. No, it is not about that, because here's the absolute proof. In America, nurse practitioners can practice medicine. The best doctor in all of Switzerland can't. Now, it is possible that the worst nurse practitioner in America is better at medicine than the best doctor in Switzerland, but I really strongly doubt it. That's not to say anything against nurse practitioners. I think they should be able to practice, but the idea that Swiss doctors can't is bizarre, and it is not about protecting people. It is just about protecting the vested interests that are controlling medical law and regulation right now.
Yeah, it's using a checkbox on an application as the gate, the magic key to get into the kingdom. And, if you don't meet their qualifications, which is all intended to, make them more money, give them more power, give them more control for whatever their short-term and long-term goals are. And,
exactly.
You touched on the AMA earlier, and, I wish I could remember more specifically. I apologize to my chiropractic friends, like Dr. Michael Brennan, for example. He told me a story that, there's the AMA. I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Excuse me. The AMA has been caught in court being fraudulent on multiple basis of really trying to corrupt the market in ways that are wrong. And then they've been fined and lost, federal lawsuits to this thing. So there's data out there to back up, what you're saying about corporations like the AMA, where the general public thinks that that's a great and perfect organization. And that doesn't mean everything that they stand for might not necessarily be good, but there's a hell of a lot of bad that's being intertwined with it, and with the power and the control and the lobbying and the corruption from that respect. And so I'd encourage others, and I'll try to revisit that story and share it on my Facebook page, but do some research on the corruptness of organizations like the AMA or the FDA that mainstream media doesn't talk about. The media is not going to bring this stuff to light because they're in on it. This much we all know.
They're controlled by the same people behind the scenes.
Yep.
Oh, for those who do want to read a bit more, one of the things that opened my eyes to what the AMA was doing, it's a book by Howard Bloom called The Lucifer Principle. It really talks about how a lot of these organizations work behind the scenes that create all this kind of havoc. It's not inherently a political book, but it's a really interesting book, and it does talk about that. Another great one, of course, is Healing Our World by Dr. Mary Ruwart. She has really explained how much damage the FDA in particular is doing, showing data that shows how many more people it's killed than anybody it's supposedly helped to save.
Yeah. Excellent book. I will actually be talking with Dr. Mary Ruwart here on the show.
Oh, nice.
In the coming weeks. So it'll be a pleasure to share her with folks out here in Washington. Okay. Yeah. So FDA, that's excellent news. Now, again, you say how should I put this? It's not about safety, right? It's about the control. but
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
about
from
money
the
as well.
right. That's from the top up. That's what they know. The people down below, they still want to be safe, right?
Yeah.
So what's a libertarian solution to safety? Okay, so abolish the FDA, but what, right? What's going to come in its place? Why don't you give us your idea what that might look like in a free market?
So I want to talk to you right now. I mean, how do you buy a medicine today, right? I don't think that most people are like, oh, I'm sick, I'm going to go look at the list of FDA approved medicines and pick one at random. That's not what you do at all. That's not your primary filter. That's not even really a filter that you're looking at, right? What do? You talk to an expert. It could be a doctor, it could be a holistic healer. You talk to some kind of expert, right, who has experience in this, says, here's what's happening with me. What do you recommend, right? None of that recommendation requires the FDA at all. Like that's not what you're doing right now. The FDA is not actually, it's not doing anything for you right now. It's just driving up the price. So you talk to this expert and the expert says, here's my expert view. And they tell you that. I grew up in a medical family. My mom was a doctor. I mean, still is a doctor for that matter. And, she would talk about, how she would pick medicine. And it was never about just some randomly approved thing by the FDA. She would talk about, she would talk to experts and consultants about their experience. She didn't know what to do. She would have, people that she really trusted and asked for their insights. It wasn't just like randomly picking medicines, right? That it's just not how it's done. It's never going to be done that way. It doesn't really matter if something's FDA approved at all or not, because you're asking an expert. And sometimes my mom would recommend things that weren't medicines. Sometimes she'd recommend changes in food or diet. It has nothing to do with the FDA at all, but it's still very effective. And we need to really get this idea that the government needs to somehow bless everything before it's going to be safe. If you want to get advice in medicine, talk to a doctor, not a bureaucrat. And then getting rid of the FDA is going to put control in the hands of people and the hands of their doctors.
So what you're saying is that the healers of the world will heal.
Yes,
and they don't need a master controlling them from above. It's amazing how that would work. The people that
exactly.
Since they were a kid, said, "Oh, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor. I want to heal people. I want to treat people. I want to save the sick." And we think that they need a billion sets of rules and regulations to be able to do that. And it's, and what it's led to is one of the most litigious industries in the entire world.
Exactly.
It's led to one of the most expensive industries in the entire world.
Yeah.
And it's imperative that we recognize what's broken. When you're an addict, right? When you're an alcoholic, you have to recognize that you have these issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, we as libertarians, that's why we focus on these issues so much, is because we could we could talk like Republicans or Democrats and be like, well, why don't we tweak this or we tweak that, or, why don't we just need one more set of rules over the top, and that'll be the magic bullet that fixes everything. And when we know to our core that it's the systems in place that are ultimately the root cause of so many of these broken
exactly. And here's the thing about that root system, right? That root system can control Democrats and Republicans. They control libertarians and Greens and constitutionalists too. And that's why it's important for us, not just as candidates or leaders in the movement, but as voters and within the movement. Ask your candidate, ask your Libertarian Party candidate, what are you going to cut? Like, ask them, what are you actually going to cut? Because here's the thing, buying a Democrat or Republican candidate is expensive. And growing up, I had people in my family, friends I went to school with, whatever, whose parents every year would donate the maximum to the Democratic candidate and the maximum to the Republican candidate, right? This wasn't about politics. This was about having somebody owe you a favor.
Yeah.
They could also donate the maximum to the Libertarian candidate if they thought that the person had a chance of winning. So you need to ask those specific questions. Don't get tricked by vague answers. If somebody isn't answering your question, ask it again. And if they don't answer the question after you've asked it 5 or 6 times, they are hiding. They're hiding the truth from you. They are lying to you. Even if they have an L by their name, they can still lie to you. Anybody of any party can lie to you. So that's why I really encourage you guys to ask those tough questions of our own candidates. We have to hold our own candidates to just as the highest standards we hold anybody else to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that same thing goes for all of us in any ballot, I think, that we're looking at. We need to set higher standards with who we're electing, and saying none of the above is appropriate. You know,
Yes.
it is appropriate, and to starve them of those votes with showing our dissatisfaction instead of playing their game of, well, you're slightly better than the other guy. You know, that's why I, got involved with the Libertarian Party, was to fully step away from what I would know was broken. Mm-hmm. And even at the time, I didn't think the Libertarian Party was perfect, and obviously I still don't. But I saw a set of principles in the Libertarian Party, that an ethos of character, and what we stand by, our statement of principles that guides our actions of what we believe government should be, and how we're going to try to attain that once we get into office. And I'm running for a position here in Washington with $600 million, $600 million tax revenue generated through the department, 240 employees, and $27 million in salary. And I want to cut it as fast as possible in whichever way I think I can get away with. And the first thing I'm going to do is interview the three attorneys on staff and find out which ones I think I can trust to help me do that, and not end up in jail or recalled in a matter of days. Because there are programs like this that are harming people.
Right.
They are harming people in a tangible way, in this case in healthcare, that is making people die, and it is not okay. And that doesn't mean that we can't find ways to safely care for one another, but that doesn't mean that we need a giant government bureaucracy that you have no idea exists, or what it does, or who's paying to have access to it. Those organizations should not exist with power over our life, and it's terrible. You touched on it with the AMA a little bit, and I'm sure just the amount of money and lobbying that goes through those departments. Mm-hmm. The pharmaceutical lobbies, the medical device lobby. Those are some of the worst in the entire nation. They spend the most money, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it.
It's publicly available information, right? Right. It's not this secret, shadowy thing. So anybody who's watching this, like, oh, these guys are talking about a conspiracy. No, we're not. It's publicly available. Go check the FEC.
They've gotten in trouble for it, actually, even in many cases. Vioxx, and the stuff that they went through that was FDA approved. There's so many harmful things. One of those harmful things, and another thing that kind of led me down the path of libertarianism that I like introducing to folks that follow the show here, is the presidential debates. So you're running for nomination of the presidential ticket here for the Libertarians. Why don't you tell folks that are tuning in that might not have heard about this? What is the presidential debates, and why are Libertarians so frustrated with it?
So, we talked about this kind of control, right? And I do think that a lot of what a libertarian president or a libertarian presidential nominee is, you do need to be kind of cunning to a certain point. The other side's cunning, and here's one thing that they did. The presidential debates used to be run by the League of Women Voters. League of Women Voters had a rule: if you were on the ballot in enough states to win, like theoretically win, they invited you to the debate. And in most states, the League of Women Voters still does that. They invite everyone to the debates, and the Democrats and Republicans often refuse to show up. The Democrats and Republicans joined together to create something called the Commission on Presidential Debates. And the goal of that thing is to just keep out anybody else. Whenever somebody has actually gotten to whatever their standard was, like it used to be 5%. Ross Perot got 5%. He was in the debates. They didn't like that too much, so they raised it to 15%. A couple of years ago, I spoke at a protest outside the office on the Commission on Presidential Debates, saying how they were getting in the way of democracy, how they were preventing voters from getting enough information. And the person who was speaking right before me, check this out. He was the person who'd written the original press release announcing the Commission on Presidential Debates. Like, he was part of that team, right?
I've heard this story.
He was so disgusted by it that he was now speaking out against it. And what they've done to democracy is absolutely terrible. Fortunately, we have alternatives. The free and equal debates are out there. If you guys haven't seen them, go get a full sense of who's actually debating, how they stand up, all that kind of stuff. And inside the Libertarian Party, we've been doing our own debates. We just had the Libertarian Party of Kentucky did their first round of debates. I'm excited they'll be moving on to the next round of that, and we'll have during the convention itself, hopefully, the Libertarian National Convention debates over there. But the really key thing for us is to not just get into the CPD debates, because honestly, they're going to just try to find some way or another to keep us out, but rather to work to get into the mainstream political debate. All right. And the way to do that, in my mind, is to force the issues, to pick the issues where we know we're going to, where there has to be two things. One, there has to be a thing we're going to get pushback. And two, it has to be something where we actually are right and can win the debate, right? So this is a great example. The FDA is wrong. And if we say abolish the FDA, we're going to get pushback. That's good. And if we keep that debate going, we make that a central issue, eventually, with enough information, anyone who researches this is going to come to the same conclusion that it needs to go. We have to stop thinking that we need to convince people in the very first time we ever speak to them. The beginning is just opening the argument. And over months, people are going to come around to our side. What a lot of candidates have done on the other, instead, have just been to avoid any topic at all out of fear of antagonizing somebody. The antagonizing somebody is the first phase of converting somebody. And I think that we need to go after these big issues, abolishing the FDA, abolishing the welfare state, shutting down foreign military bases, bringing the troops home, ending the income tax, things like that, because that is how we get into the cultural and political and social debates.
I appreciate the heart behind that, because it's something I've heard a couple others have kind of echoed here recently too, is that, we have to make ourselves relevant, in the free market, even if it's a corrupted free market, if we do things that make us relevant and create a conversation and make them pay attention to us, eventually those corporate sponsors in the other presidential debates, they're going to want us in there because they're going to profit off of us. Mm-hmm. Right. So, if we can create that and drive that conversation, especially in the ways, like you said, that are winnable, where we educate them over time and they start peeling back the onion. Even myself as a libertarian, right? I didn't come even to where I am today as a libertarian overnight. You start drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, and then you're like, oh, I want a little bit more of that. And then, you really become educated on the inner workings of these programs because somebody challenged the narrative before. Right. Exactly. And you have to ask questions. So that's
I just want to add to that, today, many people see me as kind of this extreme of the hardcore anarcho-capitalist. The fact is, I started out as a very moderate minarchist, and it was by debating against the ANCAPs that I started I had no choice but to learn what they were talking about, because I was debating against them. And I started to learn that a lot of the stuff they were saying actually made more sense. The things that initially kind of turned me off, end the Fed and the FDA, all that kind of stuff, even abolishing government schools. I used to be a supporter of charter schools and vouchers, not just getting rid of the whole thing. I learned more about it, and I came to the conclusion that it was the correct conclusion. Not my initial thoughts, but where I eventually arrived. And I think we need to have confidence that we do have the right answers, and in a long enough debate, people are always going to come to the right answers.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. Okay, cool, awesome. You answered the question I had. That's why I'm kind of off my game here. You've done this a few times, so thank you. Again, so you've got an opportunity here where some folks that are turning in are delegates, right? So, mm-hmm. One thing as a down ballot campaign myself is, what do you think the role of a libertarian presidential candidate is when it comes to down ballots and affiliates and getting the message out? How do you think that synergy works? Sure. How would your campaign be involved with other campaigns in states?
I've been a down ballot candidate. I've run for state level positions. I've run for federal positions. I've run for many different positions. The first race that I ran for state delegate. So I've been a down ballot candidate, and I have been affected by the presidential candidate. So if you look at my first campaign back in 2010, I was talking about the fair tax. Why? Because Gary Johnson was talking about the fair tax, and I figured that he was right. He'd gotten a lot of other libertarians talking about the fair tax, and I was a major fair tax supporter. And I've left those videos up because I want people to see that evolution that I went through. The the one of the major jobs of the people who are at the top of the ticket is to clearly define, to really express what libertarianism is, to argue for actual libertarianism. To draw a comparison between one of the other people running, between myself and Justin Amash has, in his Reason magazine interview, and that's the most friendly, most libertarian friendly magazine in the world, right? In his Reason magazine interview, said, as far as I could tell, nothing libertarian, but he did talk about expanding Medicaid. And that's the kind of stuff that's really going to harm the overall strategy, because people are going to say, oh, I guess that's what we're about now. We'll have down ballot tickets talking about expanding Medicaid, because if that's not what the nominee is saying, they'll say, yeah, he's probably right. He must know it. And that really does a lot of damage to the party. If I'm the nominee, I'm not going to be doing that. The Ron Paul Institute said of his recent 10-minute interview on, I think, CNN, was that in 10 minutes, he said 0 libertarian things. In 5 seconds, I'll say more libertarian things than he said in 10 minutes. And again, that is something that's going to hurt the down ballot candidates, because that'll send them the message that what we need to do is to say nothing at all, because the top of the ticket is saying nothing at all. The top of the ticket needs to set the example, needs to say that this is what we're going to do. We're going to argue our main points. We're going to talk about the big, scary things that are going to trigger the other side. We're going to debate that for a long time, for weeks and months. And we're going to come out ahead because our position is the right one.
Awesome. I think, any organization, whether it's Apple or McDonald's or Microsoft or the Libertarian Party, the Democrats, Republicans, right? The whoever's carrying the banner, right, sets the tone in that respect. So I appreciate that answer. I absolutely agree that I think that's important. Well, excellent. I appreciate your insight tonight. I think, folks need to know that the FDA is corrupt, that the money that's coming back and forth between some of these associations and in a lot of cases, even unions in a lot of ways are harmful, and that we need to continue to expose this so people can research it on their own and can draw their own conclusions, because, you, Arvin, or me, Anthony, we can't tell you all this stuff and just assume, expect you to believe it. I hope you'd be encouraged to, pick up a book like Arvin mentioned, like Dr. Mary Warart's, healing, what I'm spacing on the name,
Healing Our World,
or Death by Regulation.
Sure.
That's another great book by Mary. There's information out there that you can read that should really help you. Awesome, Arvin. We'll tell folks that want to learn more about you and your what you're doing for the Liberty Movement and the Libertarian Party. How can they find you? How can they volunteer? How can they donate? How can they give you a coin when it comes to the convention? All that good stuff.
So if you want to help out with the campaign or donate to the campaign, be a volunteer, go to votevohra.com. And if you want to help, so one of the things that my campaign is doing is using our reach and also the expertise from my business. I work in education to create services that will let people more comfortably opt out of government systems. So we have something we're calling the AP Homeschool Project, that's to help people who are homeschooling create a highly competitive college prep style education that's going to beat anything you'll see at any private school or magnet school, no matter how competitive. The website for that is aphomeschool.com. Libertarianism is part political, but it's also part how you live your life. And I think that a big part of that is finding ways that we can work together to help each other opt out of the state. And again, my website is votevohra.com.
Hashtag opt out is, I think that's a good one also.
Absolutely.
That's excellent. And, and I kind of echo that, we need to, as libertarians, opt out as much as we can and set the example. And that's not easy. Nope. I recently just got rid of all my, pretty much all my tax liability at this point, minus what they're forcibly taking from my wife. And that's something I'm actually quite pleased with. Actually, it's like monkey off my back. And so from now forward, we'll get to, plan a life around as little tax liability as possible. And, providing solutions to people in the meantime, is a lot of what I talk about, so like check out things like direct primary care, check out things like health co-op insurance, right? Mm-hmm. There's, things like Arvin's, homeschool stuff. There's things you can do today that you don't need permission for that can make your life better. Getting rid of the FDA is something that Arvin and I will work on here once we get elected. So I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. I hope you learned something. I hope we had some good conversation. If you have any ideas for Arvin and I, something that you've been passionate about, a book that you read, I don't know anything. I'm sure Arvin would agree he doesn't. Pass that information our way. Get us some reading material so we can continue to become more knowledgeable ourselves, and together we can work to make this world freer and hopefully get to complete freedom in our lifetime. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and Arvin, thank you for joining me.
And thanks for having me on.